Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. And I hope that you have a positive experience on the shir. I will give a straight up comment before we even begin, before all my other caveats, that this is not my typical kind of shir, in the fact that it's not this motivational stuff. I do that most of the time. It's pretty much information and data. And at times it might feel information overload. I could send you the video tomorrow. I could send you the PowerPoint if you want. I could send you various sources. I've spent pretty much the majority of my day putting this lecture together. And it's been an incredible experience and a learning curve for me. I can't claim to know everything, but I definitely know much more tonight than I knew 48 hours ago. And I hope you'll join me on this ride. What we're going to do is, it's all on PowerPoint. I'll put my video on a small little part, but on the most part, see this as a text-based session. We'll be reading various texts. We'll be analyzing it, unpacking it. I hope to finish by 9. If I see that there's way too much material, I might cut off and continue next week or some other time, or we'll just go a few minutes past 9. But it's a real journey that I really hope you can enjoy with me. Here we go. Okay, so where do we start? We start by the basic question. Who's your grandfather? And its relevance to your life. Now, let's note very quickly at the beginning, this is not a religious question. In other words, if you walk out of this shir tonight and nothing I said convinced you, in no way is this a fundamental of religious faith. What I'm saying now is an interesting conversation. It's an interesting debate, but there are many Jews within the realm of orthodoxy who won't take the approach that I take to evolution, to creation, to the age of the world. And that's 100% legitimate. In other words, as a rabbi, if somebody says, is it okay not to believe in God? So obviously each person's free to do what they want. But according to Judaism, there's no room within Judaism for that. But there is room within Orthodox Judaism to not take the Genesis text literally. So you can be religious and believe in evolution. There's many great rabbis, those who passed, currently, more in the modern Orthodox community, but from great Jews who don't necessarily buy into the story that the world is 5,780 years old and don't buy into the fact of creation, 6 days, and everything came into place. They believe much more evolution. So straight out, this is not a Jewish thing. I'm not here to convince anybody. Like, honestly, I don't care. In the fact, like, it's not one of my big passions that someone will walk out of, come into Linksfield community and they'll learn the Jewish perspective of evolution. For me, it's an intellectual exercise. It's just an experiment to see if we can give credo and give credit and allow space for another point of view that for many of us won't necessarily be our original point. Okay, so the first question that I'm going to ask you tonight, am I a heretic? In other words, do I take science like a joke? So number one, I believe in vaccines. I had a flu shot yesterday. Number two, I believe that Neil Armstrong did land on the moon. Number three, I don't believe the Earth is flat. Number four, America did not take down the Twin Towers. Number five, I don't believe that aliens are walking amongst us. And number six, he really did die, Elvis. Shame, I know. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, okay? That's important. Am I qualified? As a scientist, no. But as you'll see throughout the conversation, it's not so black and white where science ends and theology begins. So I believe I have a bit of qualification to talk about this, but I'll be the first one to say that when it comes to science and scientific facts, I'll never negate it. And the reason I brought those examples of things that I know to be true is because what we're going to explore together in just a few moments is that's what we call science is not so black and white. Science is very multifaceted, as we'll see in a moment. Okay. Point number one. If we define evolution as simply a change in species over time, any student of biology must agree that species do in fact evolve. The question is how much? In other words, if you're going to ask me, Rabbi, do you believe that evolution happens? That's not a question you could answer in yes or no, because evolution has many definitions. In general, they split it into two areas, evolutionary theory, microevolution and macroevolution. Microevolution is within the same species. Over time, things change. And yes, that has been studied and seen in real time. And that is pretty much saying the earth is flat if you don't believe in that. It's a fact. It's not something I believe. It's something I know to be true. If, on the other hand, we define evolution in the Darwinian sense, and what is the Darwinian sense? As a process of random mutation and natural selection by which all living beings have arisen by chance from single-celled organisms over hundreds of millions of years, we may not be on equally firm ground from a scientific perspective. In other words, if you're going to start telling me what happened millions of years ago, I could come with my own point of view, as I'll explain in a moment why based on science, not based on religion. An interesting point is, and that's why I highlighted in red, the words natural selection. Natural selection is a very funny term because I'm not the first one to point it out. It's been pointed out by many. It's actually an oxymoron because natural means that there is no selection. In other words, it's totally haphazard. Selection implies that there was an intelligent force that selected it. You see, because something that happens by chance is not selection. So it's interesting that even within this ideology that seems to imply that there's no intelligent creator, they've chosen a word, selection, which is an oxymoron to natural. It should be natural haphazardness or happenstance, just happened. Natural selection implies that there is a selector, whether it's a being, whether it's an energy, irrelevant, but you're implying within those words that there is intelligent design. That's just an interesting side point. Okay, so let's talk about various terms of science, forms of science. Specifically today, we're going to focus on two. And then the second form of science, I'm going to break down into a few points that we'll do together. Number one, the first and what most of us consider science is empirical or experimental science dealing with and confined to describing and classifying observable phenomena. That's a very straightforward thing. They're looking at something in a lab. Currently, they're checking to find vaccines for corona. It's empirical, it's experimental. There is straight out facts, and it's very hard to negate it. At the same time, and I'm not implying that I negate it, it's important to understand science doesn't deal with facts. Science, by definition, it deals with hypothesis. But nevertheless, hypotheses that happen experimental and confined and classified into what we're looking at, it's much easier to accept that it is true, at least based on the facts that we know. But then there's a second kind of science, and that's where we're going to explore tonight. And that is speculative science, dealing with unknown phenomena, sometimes phenomena that cannot be duplicated in a laboratory. So far, even with the collider in Switzerland and all the incredible advancements, nobody, and it's impossible to ever happen truly, can recreate the exact climate this world had the moment of the Big Bang. Because even if you claim to, you haven't been there to actually know all the elements. You could try, you could decipher, you can speculate, you can do mathematical equations, but to create the perfect world that was based on speculation, based not on data that you have in front of you, is called speculative science. Now, within speculative science, and when we talk about speculative science, it pretty much means anything that's not in front of you on a lab. Very often social sciences, etc. Things that based on, studies that you do, you come to conclusions, but ultimately it's not in front of you. It's not in a small little box in a lab. Now let's state the obvious. Scientific speculation is actually a terminological incongruity. For science, strictly speaking, means knowledge, while no speculation can be called knowledge in the strict sense of the word. At best, science can only speak in terms of theories inferred from certain known facts and applied in the realm of unknown. Again, at best, science can only speak in terms of theories, inferred from certain known facts and applied in the realm of the unknown. I take from here and I apply it elsewhere. It's at this point I have to say that almost all the text I'm reading to you tonight is not my writing, it's Lubavitcher Rebbe's writing. He wrote a letter, two big letters on this topic in 1953 and in 1962 in English. And he was a rabbi, but he was also a scientist. He spent years in Berlin and years in Paris in various universities studying engineering, and in general had a passion for the sciences. And he's writing this from a scientific perspective. And I felt that tonight I could have gone various approaches, but if it was good enough for the Rebbe to go from the scientific approach, I'll go with it. Okay. Here's where things get a little deep, but stay with me. It's not that difficult. Two methods in speculative science, and this is not the Rebbe's words, this is from Webster's. Webster's dictionary defines two kinds of speculation when it comes to science. Number one, interpolation, and number two, extrapolation. First, I'll give it the words that Webster's gives it, and then I'll give it the words that the Rebbe gives it, which actually for me was more understandable. Webster says, what's interpolation? The insertion of an intermediate value or term into the series by estimating or calculating it from surrounding known values. In simple English, if I have 1 and I have 100 and I know the factors of 1 and I know the factors of 100, I can then interpolate, which means any number between 1 and 100, I can estimate based on what I know about 1 and 100. Extrapolation, on the other hand, is the extension of a graph, curve, or range of values by inferring unknown values from trends in the unknown data. In the example I just gave you, it's not 1 to 100. I have 1 and 100, but now I'm inferring from 1 to 100, I'm inferring it on 150 or 101. But the problem is I don't have 101. All I have is the lowest level, which is 1, and the highest level, which is 100. I'm trying to extrapolate it. That means take it out of the first 100, the thing that can be somewhat measured, and take it out. In other words, what the Rebbe says, the method of interpolation, as distinguished from extrapolation, whereby knowing the reaction under two extremes, we attempt to infer what the reaction might be at any point between the two. Okay? So 1 and 100, and you try to infer what's between the 100. Number two, the method of extrapolation, whereby inferences are made beyond a known range on the basis of certain variables within the known range. For example, suppose we know the variables of a certain element within a temperature range of 0 to 100. And on the basis of this, we estimate what the reaction might be at 101, 200, or 2000. That's extrapolation because you went out of the known data. You had a known range of 1 to 100, and you've gone out of the known range and you've gone way beyond. Which method is weaker? I think it's a self-obvious question, but it's important to point out. Between extrapolation and interpolation, which one? The second, extrapolation, is clearly the more uncertain. Moreover, the uncertainty increases with the distance away from the known range and with the decrease of this range. Thus, if the known range is between 0 and 100, our inference at 101 has a greater probability than at 1001. I think that makes pretty much sense. Once again, if I know the factors of 1 and I know the factors of 100, I know what happens to it. We'll give an example in a moment from water. If I know what happens to water in 1 degree and I know what happens in 100 degrees, I can guess pretty accurately, but not 100%, what 101 will do. But when I go to 1001, I'm definitely extrapolating way beyond my knowledge zone. For instance, consider the relationship, this is not the Rebbe's words, the relationship of temperature and density in water. If we know the density of water at 4 Celsius and 99 Celsius, and then try to predict some other values at other temperatures, in other words, you want to know what the density of water is below 4 and above 99. we will be tremendously better off interpolating the density between these two temperatures than extrapolating even 1 or a few degrees outside this range. After all, with 1 more degree of heat, the water vaporizes and the density crashes, while on the other end, cooler water becomes less dense instead of more dense, an anomaly in all of nature. Besides, just a few degrees cooler yet feels a solid ice, which, unlike any other solid form, is actually less dense than its liquid form. So cooler water becomes less dense, and ice is even more less dense. But there was no way you would know that if all you knew is what happens at 4 and 99, because all the rules break down beneath 4 and above 99. You enter a different category. So just because I know what happens 4 and 99, and I could pretty much guess what happens at 50, that's because it's in the middle of the two ranges. How am I supposed to know from 4 and 99 what happens above 99 and below 4? I could guess, but all I could do is guesstimate because I haven't walked in those shoes. I haven't walked into 110. I haven't walked into water and tested the water beyond 99. And I can think that it grows gradually. If 98 to 99 became this dense, then 99 to 100 will become this dense. You think that. You can guess that. You don't know that. What I'm trying to prove at this stage of the discussion is it's important for us when we sit there saying science to know the difference between science that's in front of us, speculative science, and within speculative science, interpolation and extrapolation. Now, let's be honest. Let's ask the question straight out. Which one is evolution? Which category of science would you put evolution? But for a moment, I'll tell you a story. The story goes about a kid who comes to his mother and says, "Mom, I just asked Dad where we come from, and Dad said, we come from apes." And the mom looks at him and says, "Nah, baloney. Let me tell you the true story. God created Adam and Eve, and they had a baby together, and more babies came into this world until you and I." So he turns to Mom and says, "I don't get it. Dad just told me we come from apes. You're telling me we come from God? How does that work?" She says, "It's not a problem. He's telling you about his side of the family, and I'm telling you on my side of the family." In other words, teach their own. If somebody wants to believe they come from apes, sei mir gesund. The Rebbe actually one time shared a story. He says that when he was a young kid in the 1900s, he was in Cheder, in the religious school, and there was a big debate about do we come from apes or not, because Darwin was already popular by then. The book came out in 1859. So at some stage, a teacher turns to him and says, Mendel, that was the Rebbe's name, he says, "Was Arthur, what do you care? If the guy wants to think his grandmother was an ape, let him think so. Like, what do you care?" And the Rebbe said that story and kind of laughed. Fine, think what you want. Again, this is just for the intellectual exercise. Where does evolutionary theory fit? All speculation regarding the origin and age of the world comes within the second and weaker method, that of extrapolation. The weakness becomes more apparent if we bear in mind that a generalization, and this is just, go with me, I'll explain what I'm saying, but here's the premise, that a generalization inferred from a known consequent to an unknown antecedent is more speculative than an inference from an antecedent to a consequent. What did we just say? Let's explain. Antecedent is something that happened in the past. To consequent, forward. That is a speculation that's relatively easy to make. And he gives an example. 4 divided by 2 equals 2. Here, the antecedent is represented by the divided and the divisor. You know the original number 4. You know that it's divided by 2. And the consequent by the quotient. Knowing that the antecedent, in this case, gives us one possible result, the quotient, the number 2. In other words, you're forced to come to one result. You know 4 divided by 2, So that's the antecedent. The consequent is 2. But let me give you the other example. What happens when you go from consequent to antecedent? Backwards. If we know only the end result, namely the number 2, and we ask ourselves, how can we arrive at the number 2? The answer permits several possibilities, arrived by means of different methods. In other words, you give the kid a math paper and the final number is 2. How did we get to the number 2? 1 plus 1 equals 2, 4 minus 2 equals 2, 1 times 2 equals 2, 4 minus 2 equals 2. Note that if other numbers are to come into play, the number of possibilities giving us the same result is infinite, since 5 minus 3 also equals 2. 6 divided by 3 equals 2, etc. ad infinitum. In other words, a million divided by 999,998 is also that. So if all you have is the number 2 and you're trying to extrapolate backwards with only the final result, that's not the same like going forward. So that's what it means. This is going from consequent, that means the consequence, the final result, back the antecedent, back to the beginning. You're trying to imply the fact that you know the number 2, you're trying to tell us how we got to number 2. But the truth is we don't know how we got to number 2 because number 2 could have had a million different variables that led you to number 2. Another difficulty, which is prevalent in various methods of induction when you try to induce a certain point from another, conclusions based on certain known data, when they're the amplificative in nature, i.e. when they are extended to unknown areas, can have any validity at all on the assumption of everything else being equal. In other words, if you make a conclusion based on certain data and then you want to amplify it, you have to make sure that the unknown area has the assumption that everything's equal in the place that you started. That is to say, on an identity of prevailing conditions and their actions and counteractions upon each other. I'm going to have a nice Powerade, because now is a good time for coffee. If we cannot be sure that the variations or changes would bear at least a close relationship to the existing variables in degree, number 1. Number 2, if we cannot be sure that the changes would bear any resemblance in kind. And 3, if furthermore, we cannot be sure that there were not other factors involved, such conclusions of inference are absolutely valueless. Again, I haven't quoted to you any verses yet, and I won't be quoting you any verses. And by the way, in case you worry if evolution is real, yes, for the first time you ever seen me in a colored shirt. You cannot take something, in other words, you're studying the world in 2020, and you're trying to extrapolate millions or billions of years back with knowing not all the circumstances that there was at the time. That means if you're inferring backwards, you're going from backwards, as we said, back to the antecedent, but at least you know that the antecedent, the previous scenario, had a similar situation to now, then even though it's speculative science, nevertheless, it has some validity. But when you're going and you're trying to copy things now based on the way things were a million years ago, how could you? For example, right now you know the rate of how things date, carbon dating. Does that tell you how things carbon dated a million years ago? No. You can speculate, you can compare, but ultimately you don't know because you weren't there. There was nobody at the time a million years ago who wrote down the numbers of what they observed in a contained space, how things age. You can speculate based on the way things happen now, but the second I bring in other factors into the world a million years ago, that can change everything. For example, we're going to bring it in a moment. A chemical experiment. One little factor you changes the entire dynamic of the entire chemical makeup. Every once in a while throughout the year, just to make things lighter, I'll bring some quotable quotes. There was a conference on macroevolution in Chicago in 1980. Macroevolution basically means they try to take, like I said earlier in the session, microevolution is that within one species things evolve, and macroevolution is basically the whole story of evolution, the way Most of us know it, that we come from monkeys, apes, etc. So at a conference on macroevolution in Chicago in 1980, this Dr. Niles Eldridge gets up and says, the patterns we were told to find for the last 120 years, ever since the publishing in 1859, does not exist. And I'll bring you many more point nuggets throughout to show you that so many of the things that Charles Darwin, who is the founder of this idea, but who definitely propagated it and brought it out there, how so many of the predictions he said would happen to prove his data never materialized. And yet, like religious dogma, evolution continues to be not only a theory, but a scientific fact in the eyes of many. Let's give an analogy, as I just spoke a moment ago. In a chemical reaction, whether combination and decomposition, the introduction of a new catalyzer into the process, however minute the quantity of this new catalyzer, this new catalyst, may be, may change the whole tempo and form of the chemical process or start an entirely new process. I'm not a chemist, but this is basic chemistry that you could even study as a child. One tiny little percentage of something else changes the reaction on everything else. Obviously, when there's only one chemical inside, then it doesn't make a difference if you have 60 grams or 80 grams. But if you're having 50 chemicals and you start adding in one of the 50, you take or you add, it starts affecting all other 49. So back to evolution. Where does evolution stand? And I'm not here to give a sheer on what the actual evolutionary theory is, but the basic evolutionary theory is that from a soup mix, a primordial soup mix, which we'll discuss in a moment, is also a problem with evolution. How did that original soup mix come? There was a certain mix within water of various elements that somehow started a process of evolution. Now, these theories have been advanced on the basis of observable data during a relatively short period of time, of only a number of decades, and at any rate, not more than a couple of centuries. In other words, when Charles Darwin offers this theory, it was a relatively new theory because they've only been studying it for a few decades. By now, it's 200 years old. But if we go on the assumption that the world is 14 billion years old, or even 5,000, whichever one, 200 to 6,000 and 200 to billions of years doesn't give you enough data to start extrapolating backwards. Number one. Number two. On the basis of such a relatively small range of known, though by no means perfect, data, scientists venture to build theories by the weak method of extrapolation and from the consequent to the antecedent, extending to many thousands according to them billions of years. That's a buildup from point number one. In other words, you know only 200 years of data and you start extrapolating backwards. C, in advancing such theories, they blatantly disregard factors universally admitted by all scientists, namely, that in the initial period of the birth of the universe, conditions of temperature, atmospheric pressure, radioactivity, and that's the picture you have over there, radioactive, and a host of other cataclysmic factors were totally different from those existing in the present state of the universe. We know a lot more now maybe than we knew in 1960, but we still cannot create that situation. There was a known study that a teacher and a student did in the 1950s where they claimed to have created a certain similar experience to what was, but they've been disproven ever since. I mean, we could barely create the world the way it is now. We don't know the world. How in the world are we supposed to create and know all the factors and the exact percentages and every other element what was? We could use computer algorithms and it's an hypothesis, but like any computer algorithm, and just like we're following algorithms now with Corona, so all of them are wrong. And how did the doctor say it? Dr. Friedland, all of them are wrong and some of them are useful. In other words, it's a speculation. Fine, you can speculate, but so can I. When it comes to speculation, the scientist's speculation maybe has a few more percent above me, but ultimately it's not fact. And I'm not arguing then, and if I disagree with the scientist about the age of the universe or evolution, I'm not a guy that's negating having vaccinations. For me, that's a big point I want you to walk out tonight, that being religious and following religious ideas doesn't necessarily mean that the person becomes a radical. Some people do. Some people will extrapolate this ideology to all of science and think that the whole world is against them. No, because there's observable phenomena and there's speculative phenomena. And this is speculative. Here's a thought to ponder. Here's our good friend Charles Darwin. Consider, for example, the so-called evolutionary theory of the origin of the world, which is based on the assumption that the universe evolved out of existing atomic and subatomic particles, which, by an evolutionary process, combined to form the physical universe and our planet, on which organic life somehow developed, also by an evolutionary process, until Homo sapiens emerged. Think about how many things you have to jump and believe in. It is hard to understand why one should readily accept the creation of atomic and subatomic particles in a state which is admittedly unknowable and inconceivable, yet should be reluctant to accept the creation of planets, organisms, or human being as we know these to exist. What's this page saying? Because Darwin cannot explain you how the original atoms were created. What created the original soup, the primordial soup, what they call? What caused, we could say a Big Bang happened and certain things exploded, but the Big Bang exploded certain things. Who created those things? Which Big Bang put those things in place? So all science could tell me is from the Big Bang, and they can't say for fact, but they can infer from the Big Bang, this and this happened. But how did the Big Bang happen? What elements were put there to make the Big Bang? And if there were elements, someone put there. So if you could say comfortably that somebody put the elements that led to the Big Bang, why can't you say that somebody put planets as well? In other words, evolution doesn't offer you an answer from the beginning. It only offers you a partial answer, because we'll see there's many weak links even with post-creation. But evolution offers you a suggestion of what happens from the Big Bang onwards. But it doesn't give you the story of creation. How did it happen? Why did it happen? What elements were there to make it happen? So you have to believe that some intelligent being, or the way scientists will say, we don't know, which is another, as I'll show you from Richard Dawkins in a moment, that when you say, I don't know, and it basically means miraculous. In other words, when you say you don't know, that means that you're admitting that there is a godly element. Because any honest evolutionary theorist will tell you that there's serious holes. And those holes, I don't know. So if you say I don't know, and technically in I don't know, I can choose to fit an intelligent designer, whether God or somebody else, irrelevant, then why can't I say that just like the primordial soup was created by an intelligent designer, that planets on Earth were created? If your theory is lacking and there's still room for me to squeeze my theory in, then why can't I just take my theory and pull it over yours? In other words, what am I gaining from your theory? It's not giving me an absolute answer. So the big question that comes next, Rabbi, what about fossils? It's what's it called? When he wrote the book in 1859, he wrote, look at the fossils, look at the fossils. In view of the unknown conditions which existed in prehistoric times, conditions of atmospheric pressures, temperatures, radioactivity, unknown catalyzers, et cetera, as already mentioned. Conditions, that is, which could have caused reactions and changes of an entirely different nature and tempo from those known to us under the present day orderly possessors of nature. One cannot exclude the possibility that dinosaurs did exist 5,780 years ago and became fossiled over terrific natural cataclysms in the course of a few years rather than a million years, since we have no conceivable measurements or criteria of calculations under those unknown conditions. If you take right now a dinosaur, you create a dinosaur, and you check right now how long it takes to freeze a dinosaur, you still won't tell me how long it took to freeze a dinosaur millions of years ago, because you weren't there, and you don't have all the factors. And just like we showed an example of chemistry, you're speculating based on what you know in the last 200 years, how things age, or even the last 1,000 years, even the last 3,000 years. You're expecting me to now believe you that that's the way things aged a billion years ago. How do you know? You could suggest, but you don't know that. And that's the point. All I would love out of this year is when people sit there saying, I believe in evolution. That's the right way of saying it. I believe. It's a faith, just like my faith. I can't prove my faith, and evolution, as I'll show you in just a moment, can't be proven or disproven, because you could always say, well, it was different under those circumstances. But it's a faith. It's not science. It's not fact. It's not like, okay, we've checked vaccines and they don't give kids autism. That is not what dinosaur aging is. It's not that. It's not the same kind of science. Another thought about the fossils. What about the fossils? Even assuming that the period of time which the Torah allows for the age of the world, which is currently 5,780, is definitely too short of fossilization, although the Rebbe says, I do not see how one could be so categorical, let's say, we can still readily accept the possibility that God created ready fossils, bones or skeletons, for reasons best known to him, just as he could create readily living organisms as a complete man, and such readily products as oil, coal, or diamonds without any evolutionary process. What am I trying to show you over here? The Rebbe brings a very interesting point. He says the following. He says, you're going to tell me that these things have been there longer than 5,780 years. Fine, great. Maybe God put them there. Now, the question, when I've shared that theory with people before, this is what they'll tell me. They'll say, why would God do that? But that's not a question. It's like asking, why would God create me with hair? Why? Why not? In other words, why did God create mountains? Do you have a reason? Yeah, because you think it's nice. But is that why God created mountains? So asking the question, why would God do something, has no intrinsic value. I'm trying to find the words, but if not, it's fine. To sit there saying that it couldn't have happened is unfair. Okay, I can't find it here, so I'll leave it. But basically, there's a great book called Mind Over Matter, which offers very strong arguments on why, on the science in the eyes of Torah and Yiddishkeit. Okay. Another point about the fossils. This method assumes that the average cosmic ray intensity has remained constant for the whole period of the dating, and that atmospheric mixing is rapid compared to the lifetime of that thing, 6 by C, 14A. In other words, you're assuming that the average cosmic ray intensity has remained constant, but you don't know that. Guess. What about the fossils? So let's talk a little Judaism now. According to Jewish tradition, way before the idea of evolution was ever presented, the Torah told us that Adam and Eve were created as adults. He married her the day he was with her. She had a baby that day. So Adam, when you would see him the first day and you would ask him how old he is, what would he say? One day? He's not, because if he's 20, then he has a background of 20 years. Or he's a 20-year-old with zero experience, then he's not an adult, he's a baby. Think about that. There's an interesting book that came out 2 years before the book Origins. This was written by an English writer, Philip Henry Goss. You could Google it. It's called Omphaliosis. And what does that mean in Greek? It means belly button. And the question he asked was, this is in 1857, did Adam have a belly button? Why is that a relevant question? He wasn't born from a woman. He was created from the earth. So he wasn't really attached to the umbilical cord. So did he have a belly button? In other words, what's his past? What's his story? So if Adam was born and he's already a mature adult within one day, and we're told that there was trees and mountains and everything, that means the entire world was created old. And what I mean old is it's not ready, fresh made. It's not two babies. It's not two tiny animals. The animals were fully grown. The human beings are fully grown. The world is fully grown. So as hard as it is to grasp your mind, even as a Jew, even if I take the literal text of the Torah, I take the literal Genesis, I'm telling you a story that the world was created with a past. But the past didn't actually happen. But somehow it's within the DNA of the human being. It's within the world. So if I'm going to sit there counting rings on a tree and sit there estimating how old the tree is, well, even according to Torah and the literal reading of Genesis, how old is the tree that was created on day number one? Because it didn't have only one ring, it had many. It wasn't just a bunch of tiny little trees. The world was olam al miloi nivra, the sages tell us. The world was created ready-made. Now, just because I can't get my head around it doesn't mean that Torah doesn't say it. It says the world was created ready-made. And after 6 days, the world was fully complete with oceans. So the oceans were flowing from place to place. In other words, there's a past. Where did it originally come from? It's almost like, try to use your imagination like this. It's a book. You get a book. And the book starts off with the story of a bunch of adults. It's a crime novel. The book doesn't start from when all the people were 1 day old. The book starts when the guys are in their 20s, 30s, 50s, whatever. And we're expecting you to put a picture together based on the factors we tell you to go backwards. But unlike over here, it's not a book, it's real life. In other words, Adam and Eve are born with a past. So my point is, when you're going to tell me it's impossible the world was created 5,780 years ago because there's things that's older, yeah, because the world was created old. Even according to the literal reading of Torah, it was created old. The trees had rings. The bones were aged. The earth had vegetated and finally had grown into something. And all those processes happened very quickly, but they happened with a past as well. And by the way, this is a very interesting, book, belly button. Did Adam have a belly button? Very interesting way of perspective. So another argument that people have is, okay, Rabbi, okay. And I sent the ad today, is this your grandfather? And somebody responded and said, no, because that was a gorilla and we come from apes. Mazel tov. People say, but look, 99% of similar DNA means we have a common ancestor. Yeah? Maybe it means something else. Maybe it has a common designer. In other words, if we believe, let's say, accept the hypothesis with me that God designed this world. Why would he create everything with a separate design? He found a design that worked, or a design that works within this world. He created the mathematics, the DNA, and he starts multiplying it. Regardless if you accept the Big Bang or you accept that it all came from God, we all believe it started at one little thing. So it starts off at one tiny element, one true organism, and then it varies. But ultimately, just like if you look at my designs, I design posters, you'll see a similar style. You sit there saying, oh, that means that what? That one design was born from the other design? Nonsense. Just means that both designs have the same creator. So mazel tov, you found me that the ape and the human being have a very similar DNA. It doesn't tell me anything. All it tells me is chances are there was a similar designer. You want to interpret that now we come from one another? Fine, I'll go with you with your theory. Way before Darwin ever proposed this theory, already in the Medrash written in the times of the Talmud, 2,000 years ago, it says that Adam and Eve didn't only have 3 children, they had other children who were not human, but rather apes. Another Medrash, also written thousands of years ago. Now, you could have said that these things are wacko, but they weren't written 150 years ago as an excuse post-Darwin. They were written way before Darwin was even, was even an idea, before anything. They write that in the Tower of Babel, which happened in times of Noah, and Abraham was already born, so it's according to Jewish tradition, it happened about 3,800 years ago. one of the punishments for the people who built the Tower of Babel was they turned into apes. I can show you the Medrash. It says so on the Parsha of Noach, they turned into apes. So you're going to sit there walking over to me and saying, Rabbi, we and apes have similar DNA. So first of all, our answer is, doesn't say we come from a common ancestor. The answer is it comes from a common designer. If you still want to insist, yeah, it comes from a common ancestor. But who said the common ancestor is an ape? Maybe it's me. Maybe the ape is the child of the human being. How did you know that? How did you extrapolate that one was the father and one was the child? And by the way, with all the things that we found, we have still not found the exact process how one thing evolved into the next. We've claimed to have found various different fossils that are similar to human beings. A lot of the things have been disproven, but a lot of things have still remained steady. But it's a lot of inferring how the things happened. How did it evolve? We still have never seen in a lab macro evolution. We've seen microevolution within a species. Things change. That's been seen. But we've never seen in documented history an ape develop human intelligence. We've never seen it. You found bones and you're trying to infer from bones that that was my grandfather. How do you know that? Were you there? Did you see him cohabit with ape lady and together they gave birth to my granddaddy? What exactly did you see? You're telling me I have similar DNA, but as I said, we have a common designer. Or they come from us, but how do you know? How can a person look at me straight in the eye and say, this is fact? It's not fact, it's hypothesis. A very interesting quote from Sir Fred Doyle. What does Fred Doyle say? Scientists have replaced, religious mysteries that shrouded the question of the origin of life with equally mysterious scientific dogma. The chance that a single bacterium ever evolved on Earth is so outrageously small. Listen to this. And this has been quoted by science magazines as I show some of the Scientific American reprinted the later quote, but it's the same point. It is calculated for one bacterium to be created at a chance of near 1 in 40,000 zeros. In other words, 1 out of 1 with 40,000 zeros. That's the chance that a single bacterium ever evolved on Earth. Now you tell me, what's a bigger leap of faith? That or God? Next, he gives another example just to make it more visible. It's comparable to 1,050 blind people all simultaneously solving a Rubik's Cube. Same time. Is that possible? I guess it's possible. Is it plausible? Not at all. It's not. It's ridiculous. You can't get your head around that. Another example he gives, which is for me the best, is to a whirlwind blowing through a junkyard and assembling in that junkyard from all the pieces a ready-to-fly Boeing 747 with the pieces in. Scientific American reprinted this quote and added, most researchers agree with Hoyle on this point. So in other words, just look at the quantum leap you have to take if you want to accept evolution. You have to accept that a whirlwind blew around a junkyard and put a plane together. Can it happen? As he said, 1 in 1 and 40,000 zeros. Get your head around that. That takes as much faith, if not more faith, than saying God. So what do I want to walk out with tonight? Here's I think we will finish on time. If you cannot prove it in experiment, because you can never recreate that, and thus you cannot verify, it's not scientific. By the definition of the scientific method is experiment and verify. You can't do that. So this is not science, it's speculation. Now let's talk about the predictions that our good friend wrote, and this is the original book, The Origin of Species by Charles Darwin, by means of natural selection. What's the predictions? In his 1859 book, Origins of Species, Darwin predicted that the fossil record will show that 1, species appear gradually. 2, they change constantly. 3, disappear gradually. And 4, missing links between major types will be filled in. Well, let's see how we've done there. Discoveries, they appear suddenly. Species show no significant change. Species do disappear suddenly. And missing links are getting more unresolved as time goes. He gave 4 predictions, not one of them that's been proven. And yet his thesis is still the gospel. I'll give you an example when I say gospel. I'm a big fan of TED. I love their quality and I love their talks. Now, a lot of it is science, it's wonderful. Sometimes a person will get up over there and start talking about social sciences, in other words, a human being. And they start giving me an hypothesis that the reason I get that we have fear is because my granddaddy, who lived in the wild, he had to know the difference between a tiger and a cat. So therefore he developed fear. Is that science or hypothesis? Were you there? Did you see that at that moment fear created? Maybe God created fear in the human being. How do you know that fear was created because we used to live in small bunches? I've heard that theory so many times, it's coming out of my ears. Because we lived in small bunches, therefore we started becoming dependent on each other. That's when we became social animals. That's a speculation. You don't know that. Were you there? How did you make that a fact? But they get up there on this stage and they tell it to you, not we theorized. Nope. Once upon a time when we lived in small bunches, this and this is what we did, and that's why we are the way we are. That's not science. You're making a fool because you're making a joke out of real science. Because real science, you could get up over there and say, yes, we've checked them that seeds don't cause autism. We've seen that water is good for you and sugar is bad. Fine, that's science. I'll accept that. Don't start telling me what my ancestors did 4 million years ago in the wild, how that created fear within me. You don't know that. So let's talk about faith and science. All the theories, I see we have chats. Hi, Rabbi, 1 second. Really appreciating hearing your discussion. My concern with treating evolution as a science is it is a scientific theory, not a science. Chemistry, physics, etc. are scientific methodologies applied to try and understand the theory better. Fair. All the theories of evolution are based on the assumption that the world began with basic matter. And then, at some point in time, for reasons completely unknown to us, evolution began. Various parts of this basic matter supposedly combine in a cumulative effort until after some time matter evolved into vegetation and later into animal life, etc. When one asks where the original basic matter came from, the response is it's not the job of the scientist to answer that question. Or, if he or she is a believer, they may respond that God created that matter ex nihilo. The same is true of the other fundamental question. What caused the evolutionary process in the first place? Why at that specific time rather than earlier or later? Thus, from a scientific perspective, believing that God created billions of atoms for which he established certain natural laws, and that these atoms later developed and evolved from stage to stage in accordance with these laws, is no different than believing, in accordance with the straightforward meaning of Sefer Bereshit, Genesis, that God created the heavens and the earth on the first 24-hour day, separated the waters on the second, etc., until on the 6th day, he created man who possesses an intellect, can talk, and is on a very high evolutionary level. On the contrary, from a modern scientific viewpoint, it is by far more implausible to create something from complete nothingness, which is the original. Remember what I said, evolution came from certain things having a big bang, but those things were created from nothing. That's a bigger miracle than creating from that something another something. So if evolution has to agree that something created nothing into something, into those original matter, into that primordial soup, even a simple celled organism, then to form an entity on a high evolutionary scale from basic matter, even in a very short time. In other words, the evolutionary theorist will have to agree with me that some intelligent designer or something created that original soup, those original particles. Then they start telling me evolution took over. But evolution is now doing the easier job. It's creating something from something. But the harder job was creating ex nihilo, something from nothing. And that we don't have an answer for. So if you have room then to say that God did the first creation, ex nihilo, something from nothing, then why can't you say that God did something from something? That's much easier for God to do. What are you gaining? Another few quotes. Darwin in the 6th edition. If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed, which could not have possibly been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. In other words, show me one thing which couldn't have had come into slow, slight modifications, and the theories break down. Everything had to come through slow, numerous, successive slight modifications. And then later in his book, he says, use imagination to fill in the gaps, because he creates these gaps, use imagination, which for me means use faith. Why not? In other words, all his ideology rests on is we'll never find something that hasn't been evolved through successive slight modification. But my argument would that be, show me something that has been evolved, macro level, that way. And Richard Dawkins in the book River Out of Eden says, evolution is very possibly not an actual fact, always gradual. But it must be gradual when it is being used to explain the coming into existence of complicated, apparently designed object like eyes. In other words, there's not too many rooms for mistake. It's so complicated. For if it is not gradual in these cases, it ceases to have any explanatory power at all. Without gradualness in these cases, we are back to a miracle, which is simply a synonym for the total absence of explanation. It's quite interesting he uses those words. But in other words, what he's saying is that there wasn't a lot of room for error with eyes. It's so detailed. And you have to show me the gradual stage. But we haven't found the gradual evolution of eyes. We haven't found that. We haven't not found it. We haven't found it. So that's my thoughts. You're going to ask me, okay, Rabbi, so what's the punchline? The punchline is the following. But I hope you come out tonight with, and I'm willing to send this to anybody who would like. Having a religious idea doesn't mean it has to be based on just religion. It's not a bunch of radicals. A lot of the ideas that are accepted within what you would call the ultra-Orthodox community have some basis, even within science. And what I hope that you could give credit, even if you disagree with everything I said, is both ideologies have merit. Personally, I find that faith has more merit. You don't have to accept that. You're my guest. But they both have merit within science. And yes, my child will be going in the next few days to have their vaccine. Don't worry. Thank you so much for joining. I really, really appreciate every one of you and the fact that you guys stayed through that. That was a very data-heavy shir. But thank you so much, and God bless. Have a great night. For those who want to stay, I'll have a bit of music.